Nice to see. Good to see everyone. We had a 1 week break, but now we continue with the second class that's taking us from when the children of Israel left Sinai and all the way to the Promised Land. I'm not sure how far we're going to get, but today we're going to
How far to the Promised Land?
how far to the Promised Land? It might take us 40 years to study all of it. But we're going to be looking at in detail at what happened right as they left. They left amidst a lot of wonderful hopes, and they sounded the trumpets, and they were all organized, and everything was good. But then we started reading at the end of the last class, they started to complain bitterly, and we saw that there was the beginning of a bad situation. So we're going to look deeply and continue our discussion. What was happening? Why did it create such trouble for them? Why did Moses react the way Moses did? What were they all going through? What was the internal journey of the children of Israel? And that's been some of our discussion as we think about how we all also react to all the journeys of life. Okay. So let's turn to share my screen. Alan will start as always. Can everybody see?
No.
No, it's blank.
Yeah, just a blank screen.
Okay, here we go.
There we go.
Okay. And we're gonna start a little bit before, just to recap where we were, and then we will continue. So Alan, please go ahead.
Okay, the people took to complaining bitterly before Adonai. Adonai heard and was incensed. A fire of Adonai broke out against them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to Adonai, and the fire died down. That place was named Taberah, because a fire of Adonai had broken out against them. The riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving. And then the Israelites wept and said, "If only we had meat to eat." We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like bdellium. The people would go about and gather it, grind it between millstones, or pound it in a mortar, boil it in a pot, and make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall upon it. Moses heard the people weeping, every clan apart, at the entrance of each tent. Adonai was very angry, and Moses was distressed. And Moses said to Adonai, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not enjoyed your favor, that you have laid the burden of all this people upon me? Did I produce all this people? Did I engender them, that you should say to me, 'Carry them in your bosom as a caregiver carries an infant, to the land that you have promised on oath to their fathers?' Where am I to get meat to give to all these people when they whine before me and say, 'Give us meat to eat'? I cannot carry all this people by myself, for it is too much for me. If you would deal thus with me, kill me rather, I beg you, and let me see no more of my wretchedness."
Okay, we're going to stop there. Strong words from Moses, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Why did God go from being angry at the beginning, right? He's incensed, but then he becomes very incensed. Well, first, the people they just complain, and then they're even complaining even more, right? And they're saying they're missing Egypt.
What was the question? Why did God go from,
He was incensed, but then he went to being very incensed. Why did God become even more angry?
Well, Moses prayed to Adonai and the fire died down.
Beautiful, right? God already resolved one issue. He put out one fire, and immediately later there was another one. What do you think of Moses's words?
Is God showing a political face or an authentic face here? I mean, is this stuff coming from God in some sense? Well, of course, we don't know because we don't know the thinking of the divine. But what do the rabbis say about that? Does God lie to the people, or does he show a political face ever?
Lie in how he's acting to them, or in how what he's
lie in how he's pretending to be angry.
Mhm. That's a very complicated thought idea. What do you think? I mean, is it possible for God to be angry?
I don't think it's possible for God to be angry. I think what's happening is that it's somehow God sort of melded with Moses that's angry. It's Moses more or less that's angry. And the way I read this is Moses is playing both parts here. Moses is playing the part of the divine and playing the part of himself. And the speech that we're getting in the Torah is Moses playing both parts.
And one other way of looking at it potentially would be, in our best moments, I thought this is where you were going to go with it, but showing your political face, what that means is sometimes, my kids will not be listening to me in the morning. They have to get early now to go to camp because the bus to go to Camp Ramah leaves at 8:15. So Shava likes to meander in the morning, and I'm not really angry at her, but I'll kind of get my voice up to kind of get her to, you have to go now. You got to put on your clothes, pretending to be a little bit upset just to get her to move a little bit faster because she has a time constraint. And so, is God responding to them because God is being like a parent teaching them? Or, there's also the idea that we have free will, that on some level, maybe God knows which way we're going to pick, but, he's watching us, hoping we're going to make the right decision, and she cares a lot. So when we make the wrong decision, it's God to some level feels disappointed in us. Why are we again being not
I don't think God feels disappointed or feels anything at all towards us. I mean, it depends if you're
That's a human attribute.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is a very interesting part of the Torah because the personality that seems to be coming from the divine. And the personality that seems to be coming from the divine is, of course, a human personality.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise we wouldn't recognize it as a personality. So we know he pretends to be angry. It's very, I don't know what to make of this.
Well, this is where, let me just finish one thought, and then Phil, go ahead. But the way the Kabbalists deal with this bigger picture is a way that philosophers don't always like. But the Kabbalists will say, God is one, echad, but there are different parts of God, so to speak. It's almost like if you're dealing with a corporation, so when you're dealing with the CEO of the corporation, the CEO is never going to get angry with you. The CEO is above. But when you're dealing with the postman at the bottom of the CEO. Really, the CEO and the postman are one. They're all part of the same organization, so to speak. But you can't even comprehend the CEO. But when you're dealing with the postman has elements which make the corporation seem more human to you, so you're able to relate. And you can give gifts to the postman will be happy, and the postman will say, will talk to you, and so to speak. So there's the Kabbalists, they say there's parts of God which do have a semblance of human emotion, or have, right, the small nose is what it's called, one of the names, Zer Ampin. It's a part of God which is less lofty and which has some kind of variety of human emotions. But go ahead, Phil.
Thank you. Let me back up a second, because David said he has a problem with this text because on the surface, at least, it presents God as angry. Indeed, it does. I mean, this is the deity in this book, and he's angry, and fires break out and plagues break out, we can turn it into something else, but that's the story that we're told, and it's very powerful, and Moses responds in a very human way too, with rather a sarcastic line of rhetoric about am I like a nursemaid? Am I a guardian? Whatever. That you do this to me.
Did I birth this people? Right, a lot of chutzpah to say that to God.
Right, and it strikes me very powerfully on both sides. But you just used the word, Rabbi Glick, you just used the word. I think you said it was a Kabbalistic term. Was it apin or something like that?
Zer Ampin, the short nose.
Okay, is that the same nose that we have when it says literally God's nose was burning, when it says his wrath?
Probably where it comes from it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is. I see. So because I know that's the idiom that we have. Okay. So they're transmuting that too then into something that works in their system of thinking, just the way the philosophers have like David, I might say, have are pushing toward a system in which it makes sense, in which we don't have a God who gets angry, because that's very disturbing, and yet that's the story we have. I just want to make sure
I think it's nice to bring that perspective to it. And one part that we could say perhaps may bridge some of all of them together is there's an intensity that's reflected between God, the people, and Moses. Suddenly it's blowing up, right? There's an intensity that they're all reflecting off each other. This was last week's Parsha, and David Schwartz, our director of education, was reading it. And I've known him a long time, and he has a funny practice of reading Torah and doing little voices while he does it, which he does little hand motions. And I appreciated the interpretation, which has a long tradition. I also have memories of people getting upset at him for doing voices while reading the Torah. But he would do this voice when the children of Israel were crying, because they're doing a lot of crying, and there's an intensity. I would do the crying maybe a little bit differently than he does, but they're crying. The people of Israel are crying again and again and again, and that just gets God mad and Moses mad, and there's an intensity that's being reflected on every level of, all hell is breaking loose. It begins with a fire, but the fire comes out, but the fire is really growing, right? So let's get into some detail a little bit of.
I know I said this last week, but the same thing just always strikes me, is that Jewish people have often been, so we just complain too much. And so it even goes back to way back then.
And Moses too, right? Moses's voice sounds like my great grandfather. I can imagine my great grandfather, kill me already. I don't want to deal with this anymore. That he would say that all the time.
Right.
He was once in a bank that was being robbed in Canada, and the bank robber said, "Everybody get down." And he said, "I don't want to get down on the floor. Kill me, go ahead. What do I care?" So
Rabbi, I have a
Go ahead.
question. Why are the people that are, they say, why do they call them the riffraff in their midst felt the gluttonous craving?
Okay.
Where is it? What's the translation for that word?
Beautiful. Thanks for bringing that up. So we're gonna, that's maybe where we'll start. And I think it's actually really important because it's talking about, well, where is this coming from, and how does this thinking start amongst the group? I think that's really interesting discussion. And so the word for riffraff is not at all riffraff. It's just really means those who are gathered. And I guess because it's interpreted negatively, our translation then makes the whole sentence sound negative. But there's a smaller group that we do know, and I didn't bring all the commentary on this, but there's different. We know that when the Israelites left, there was a mixed multitudes who were not Israelites who left with them. So some commentators want to blame this on those who weren't Israelite, that they started all of it. Others,
What not?
yeah, really. Others say that it was Datan and Aviram, who are these two characters who are blamed for everything that goes wrong. They're the ones that started the golden calf, and they're the ones who were with Korach and started the rebellion against Moses, and they're the ones, and they were, according to the medieval commentators, they were the ones who were working with the Egyptians in Egypt. So everybody's trying to blame it on who these people were. Who are this group who started to cause some trouble? But what's clear is that it spreads from them to the rest of the children of Israel. But let's go to Ramban and to kind of get deeper into this. Morris, do you mind reading this comment? This comment is not on the mixed multitude, but on a very interesting expression. And well, I'll just quickly go back for a second to the Hebrew and English. So here it says, felt a gluttonous craving. But in the Hebrew, it's they lusted a great lust, or they desire the great desire. They turn this to a gluttonous craving, but something happened there. Okay. Let's see. Okay.
All right. Rambam. And the mixed multitude that was among them, hitavu ta'ava, fell a lusting. The meaning of this double expression, which translates literally as lusted a lust, is that they had nothing lacking in the wilderness, for they had plenty of manna, and they could make of it all different kinds of delicacies with distinguished flavors, as scripture relates further on. But they goaded themselves to a great desire, as if they wanted to eat even charcoal or earth and other bad foods.
So what he's saying is, I think, such an interesting idea that they could make anything appear. They could make the manna into a beautiful cake, but they worked themselves into this such big place that they started to make appear bad food from their own. They created it themselves from their own minds, so to speak.
So these are the people they're talking about are the very passionate ones, the ones that are controlled by the most animal, most bodily passions. And I think that's probably the point he's trying to make.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, right? That they were, and it wasn't all of them, but it started with them, and then and they started to make appear this bad food, and that then caused the trouble.
Would you say that the mixed multitude, or the what does the new JPS say? The riffraff, which is a nice word because it sounds like that, asaf suv, that they are they are described as not part of, at least it seems, of the children of Israel themselves, because it says the children, they were among them, if I'm reading that right, Asher B'kirbo. So, and then the children of Israel also, they also did this. So it was like they were, it was like the outside agitators were among them, and then the actual children of Israel went along with it. So it's not like a racial thing, but these other people were doing it and then they did it. But you can sort of look to blame the people who aren't really part of our group as at least instigators, or is that way off?
No, I think that's exactly it. It's the text itself seems to make a difference between, right? It says the riffraff, and then the Israelites wept. So it's saying they weren't Israelites, right? It's saying that they were something is happening there. To put the blame not only on the Israelites, but it doesn't seem to take very long before the Israelites start to weep. Let's see. Okay. I mean, Chizkuni doesn't give that much more, but go ahead, please, Morris, and read Chizkuni.
Okay. And in due course, even the elite of the people, the
Bnei Yisrael,
Israel, also joined a weeping of discontent that had been started by the mixed multitude. This is when they expressed their urge to be given meat to eat. If only someone would feed us meat. The quails which had materialized on the evening before the manna started its daily appearance had come to an end some time ago. From this verse, we understand the substance of the people's complaint.
So this is, he's not interpreting the mixed multitudes as not being, this is another way that the commentators see it, but they see that because it says B'nai, the children of Israel, that's not all the Israelites, but those were the elite. So it begins with some people who they were Israelites, but they weren't the elite, but then it spread to the elite as well. That's how Chizkuni wants to interpret it.
An example of this, I remember many years ago, I was standing in Heidelberg, Germany. An individual looked up. There was nothing there to see, but within 5 minutes, every single person in this group was looking up. So that's what these people did. They were complaining, so then the rest of them complained also. It's like join the crowd.
Exactly. But that feeling is so present in this passage, isn't it? Like people are so easily and complaining, a crowd, the way crowds work, right? So easily one person and then every
join in, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, one sees it in any group. Nobody complains about everything's fine, and one person starts to voice their complaint, and suddenly everybody's complaining about it. It spreads so quickly. It's just
what type of person is dissatisfied with the manna and needs meat?
Mm-hmm. I think that's
what people are we talking about here?
What do you think?
Well, I think what we're talking, the manna is more like a spiritual food. It's like free energy that comes from the divine that can be transformed into anything, meat. So it takes maybe a higher level of thought to be satisfied with manna, and a lower level of passion coming from your body. So the people that are into the meat are the people who have passions coming from their body, which I think after a while, the mitzvot and the commandments are going to try and suppress those. So maybe they're showing here the need for further work on this group to suppress the meat-eating instincts of many of them. Now, I mean meat-eating instincts. I'm not specifically talking about meat, but I'm talking about a specific kind of passion that doesn't get satisfied with spiritual stuff.
Beautiful. I really, I think that's exactly where we're going with it. It's there, that's exactly what's happening. And that's why those words are so important. The lusted the lust, right? It wasn't just about craving meat, but it was about a dissatisfaction with how hard it was for them to live this spiritualized life, of which the manna was the most distinct element, but it was everything. But let's see how the commentators are going to continue that kind of line of thinking. Morris, just read a little bit more of this other one. This is by the Tur HaAruch, who ended up writing a very important halachic halachic work, the work before the Shulchan Aruch that was most important. But then he also wrote this commentary drawing a lot on Ramban, on Nachmanides. So we're playing between the Torah and Ramban. So go ahead. They induce a craving in themselves.
Oh, you want me to read?
Yeah, go ahead.
They induced a craving in themselves. Nachmanides writes that actually they did not lack anything at all, as they had enough manna to satisfy each one of them. And they were able to satisfy their palates by wishing how that manna should taste each time they ate it. However, they abused these powers of imagination and wished the manna to taste revoltingly in order to have an excuse to complain about not getting proper food.
They wanted physical food, so they were just tired of it. This next comment by Ramban, I'm not sure we're going to read. It's interesting, but it's just about, well, I think it's interesting in the context of their complaint, which Alan read so nicely about the melons and the cucumbers and the leeks. And it was like, I guess the commentators are all asking the question, really, did the Egyptians treat them so nicely that they gave them fish and gave them melons and gave
I don't think
cucumbers? Like, where?
Why did they run away?
Yeah, why did where did all this?
The good old days were never as good as you remember.
Exactly. So the Ramban is saying, well,
They gave it to them for nothing.
Yeah.
It was for free. No.
exactly. They're trying, well, let's
Wonderful.
Fish, the fish was for free. I'm seeing that a little differently. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I'm
Hi,
late.
Nancy.
Slaves for time eternal have always had kitchen gardens. You can grow leeks really easily. Leeks, onions, all melons, cucumbers. Melons and cucumbers are there in the same family. They grow really well with irrigation. I don't find that so unusual. I don't find that so hard to believe that slaves would be growing leeks, onions, garlic, and all that stuff, or that they would be fishing fish for naught out of a river tributary. That does not surprise me so much. In the Negev, in the wilderness, they're moving around. They cannot plant because they're moving. Their water is coming from wells, so they're not able to fish. I think that this was a steady food source that they had when they were enslaved that they no longer have. And that's why they're complaining about it, because it's the food that you don't have that you crave, right? Even though you're well fed, you always want to crave what you don't have. I don't find that so unusual.
I kind of agree with that too. Even the commentators are all responding to that, but I agree that in Egypt, and I mean, it's kind of what Ramban says, but Egypt was very, it's one of the bread baskets of the world around the Nile, and it was good soil. They could grow all kinds of things, and there's a lot of fish too. So it makes sense that they would have been able to get fish, in a tributary or. So I'm not sure. Go ahead, Judy. Go ahead.
More that it's so human to want what you don't have.
Yeah.
And that's really the heart of this.
Right. It's so human. And once you start expressing that feeling within yourself, it's very hard to get away from it. Once it's woken and everybody's talking about it, and it's hard not to be swept up in it, and
it's spiritual work not to be, and people obviously at this point were willing to do that.
It was very hard for them to do that work. And once it was out of control, they had a lot of trouble. Once those among them who had that big lust for more concrete life and food. When that vibe started to spread, so to speak, it got everybody, and suddenly everything looked bad. We know that feeling when you're holding on to something new, a new way of living. But suddenly everything looks bad, and they completely. Whereas Rashi says, our eyes are on the manna. So Rashi says, we see nothing but this manna in the morning, manna in the evening.
What is the matter with Mary Jane? It's lovely rice pudding for supper again.
So let's go to one expression which I think is quite interesting in this whole complaint of theirs, and it's gonna continue what David was saying earlier. And now our gullets are shriveled, was what our translation said, but the word in the Hebrew is our souls or our beings or our breath is dried up, right? Now our gullets are shriveled. Vatan nafshenu, our breath is dry, literally. Our breath is dry, our soul is dry. So why is their soul dry? Why is their breath dry? What is, there is nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. So what is it that they're missing?
For soul, right? And that's in that section. So there is a way of thinking where there are 5 levels to the soul. There's the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, the chai, and the yechida. And the nefesh is the lowest level of the soul. It's the animal part of the soul and that particular system of thought. So they're saying that their soul is dried up. I mean, we shouldn't think of the soul that they're talking about as being a very high level soul or a very spiritual soul. It's the body-centered soul that's dried up. And maybe they don't have other kinds of souls at this point. Maybe the whole trip is to get them to develop higher level souls. I'm not sure.
Beautiful, very nice. And I think definitely a Kabbalistic and a way, and the Kabbalists will draw on that passage in this way. Phil, go ahead. Are you going to talk?
Thank you. I appreciate that line of thinking, sure, but I'm thinking that when we were doing some of the Psalms some months ago, and we saw that this word nefesh has been spiritualized, and that in some of the Psalms it's easiest to understand it according to, I guess, a very early a meaning of throat or gullet, as in the water rises up to my gullet, rises up to my throat when I'm in a terrible situation. So that it's very physical in a way. So I'm just sick unto death of this manna, and so I like the concrete meaning or concrete or early meaning, which seems to fit. I think that's why the new JPS as well as altar, for example, use a word like gullet or throat here, because it's about this food that's getting dry. It may not seem very generous to God because he's given us this, but here we are out in the desert and we're getting sick of it already.
But it's very, I think it's very interesting. One way that we could look at both of those is that the word in the Hebrew, at this stage of the Torah, maybe it had many shades of meaning. I mean, it meant galet, but they also knew the nefesh meant the being or the a very early form of understanding what we now call soul. Or, I mean, words in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew only had 20-30,000 words. So every word had many shades. Sorry, that's modern Hebrew, only has 20-30,000 words. Ancient Hebrew had much less than that, had 4,000 or 5,000 words. So every word had many shades of meaning. But let's see, because we're going to look at all of those shades of meaning in these different commentators. So Norma, could you mind reading for this? Rambam.
But now our soul is dried away. This means that because of their many desires, their temperaments had become heated and then dried up. As Onkelos translates it, but now our soul is lusting. Or it may be that they meant that our soul is dried away because there's nothing with which to moisten it, since food produces essential liquids in the body which satisfy the soul. And they said, we have naught save this manna to look at, meaning that even the food, the manna, on which we live is not in our possession, so that our soul can be nourished and satisfied with it, but we desire it and look to it. We are dependent upon it at all times in anticipation that it will come to us. Thus we have nothing at all save our hope for the manna. They thus gave expression to the known proverb, one cannot compare a person who has bread in his basket with one who does not have bread in his basket. For since the manna only came down in the quantity required for that day, and none was to be left for the following day, and if it was left, it rotted. They were therefore in constant worry for their next day's food. Therefore, scripture tells us how many qualities the manna had, stating that its taste was as the taste of a cake baked with oil, thus declaring that the soul of those who ate it did not dry up, for the manna supplied the body with the essential liquids, kept it satisfied, and the souls of those who ate it were like a watered garden and like a spring of water. That's
Was
beautiful.
it-
Oh, that's
Very nice,
beautiful.
very nice.
Yeah.
So what Ramban is bringing also, which is obvious from the effect of the text, which is we have them complaining about how bad the manna is, and then the text has a little passage where it tells us how amazing the manna is, right? The Torah straight away, after they complain, says, well, it tasted like coriander and seed, and they could make anything they wanted out of it. So that's the text's way of telling us their complaints were hollow, right? It wasn't as bad as they made it.
And it's easy for Ramban to say how good it was. Centuries later,
She wasn't
millennia
there.
later,
And after
He
you-
wasn't there, yeah.
put yourself in the position of the Israelites. They're used to having real food, and all of a sudden they don't have the physical food anymore. Yeah, sure, they get manna every day, but it's not like what they're used to. And this is still the generation from Egypt,
Yeah.
and they're going through a transformation. So
Yeah.
I'm not probably as critical of them as what I'm sensing Ramban is.
So, let's have empathy on them, Alan is saying, and it sounds, it's like a science fiction book or movie, right? This food that can be anything, but it really tastes like nothing. That's what it sounds like, right? It's the food, it can look like anything you want, but it all tastes the same, like rich cream. So is it really what you want? Now, he's going to bring something which I think adds to our discussion. The rabbis can be funny about these things. And Chizkuni is taking a very literalist kind of approach and understanding of this whole conversation. So Norma, do you mind reading Chizkuni for us?
Skuni, and now our soul is dried up. They were afraid that seeing that the manna was absorbed by their bodies entirely, none of it being waste to be excreted, that this would so interfere with their intestinal organs that it would kill them internally. They did not understand how a human being born from the womb of a woman can survive on food such as the manna alone. They challenged Rabbi Shimon by asking, what is it that keeps you alive? Is it not the excrement which is described in the Torah in Deuteronomy 20:14? And have a paddle with you to cover your excrement. Torah addressing the Jewish soldier. The rabbi answered the questioners that what is excreted are only the contributions to food provided by the Gentiles. None of the manna needs to be excreted as it originated in the heavenly spheres where there is no useless or harmful substance. So that's weird.
It's a little funny.
Contributions to food provided by Gentiles. Wow.
That part is, but what it's saying is interesting, which is it's the food was so spiritualized that, you know, it wasn't like normal food where there's good, there's bad, some that comes out, some that stays in. It was just you eat it and you know, it was a completely different kind of food, and it was spiritualized food.
They understood though that as he says that that you needed to have excretion in order to maintain the system. I think that's what he's saying, or that they're saying,
yeah.
of your bowels. You know, we have the morning
Exactly.
prayer. So, you know, to keep the tubes and the
pipes.
the vessels open and operating, something has to go through them. They have to have an acute understanding of that. And he says, well, they don't appreciate how you could spiritualize everything, but then you're still born of woman. So you're still, which I think is a fine thing to be born of, don't misunderstand. But it means you're a creature of the flesh. And I didn't want to lose the sight of what Ramban said, another point that he made, which was because the manna has to be consumed that day, you have no sense of setting something aside. You have to rely only on the next day's providence or beneficence from a source that you can't control. And that's very disturbing to people.
You're like a bird or some other kind of animal who can't put the food aside. So it puts you in a situation where you're completely dependent on this miracle. It has to happen every day, which is sort of a fearful situation perhaps to be in. Or it could be the opposite of that.
Well, perhaps they started out, you know, I'm thinking of people who grew up in the Depression, you know, and they tend to, not always, but, you know, they experience poverty, or anybody who experienced poverty, they like to then keep very full, you know, cupboards and very filled basements because, you know, or they go, you know, I had a family friend, she's still with us. She grew up during the Depression. And whenever she goes shopping in Jerusalem and she sees a sale, she buys like all of it, you know, because she's like, wow, this, you know. So it's kind of like it's an instinct, right? And so as slaves, they might have had that instinct, and God was very forcibly working against that instinct in so many ways. And the food isn't even like normal food. And you can just imagine, you know, gives you empathy, as Alan was saying, for these poor people. The food is not really going through their systems the way they're used to it. They have to just trust in that day's worth of it. It's demanding a lot of them. But let's read the Torah Aruch just a little bit more, because he's again continuing what Nachmanides is saying, what Ramban is saying. Phil, do you mind reading for us?
Not at all. We have nothing to look forward to but manna, even the food that we live on now, that is the manna. We must always hopefully and expectantly look for it if it will materialize. And we have no stored surplus, enabling us to experience peace of mind. Rather, we need to crave for it, never knowing if it will materialize. In response to these spurious complaints, the Torah gives us details in verses 7 to 8 of the multifaceted uses the manna could be put to. Even its external appearance was extremely pleasing to the eye.
Do you know, the manna reminds me of a thermodynamic term that's called free energy. And free energy is a term in thermodynamics where it can transform itself into work, into essentially anything material, anything having to do with human motion, etc. So the manna is this blast of free energy that then can transform itself, of course, into food, which is very interesting as far as a miracle is concerned.
And it's very, very interesting to add to it. What we've been saying is that they could make it into any food they wanted it, but they had to use their imagination. And if if they were in a bad place, you know, it would turn it into rotten food. But if they were in the, you know, so somehow their part to play in it was kind of sounds very sci-fi like. let's. So the next section we have is, they could boil it, they could do into cakes, they could do whatever they want to it. And then we have Moses heard the people weeping, every clan apart. Why does it mention that? At the entrance of each tent. I just wanted to, and then we have Moses was distressed and he begins his complaint against them. So let's see, I think because we're linking between the two parts of this story, and these two next comments are very interesting based on what we've been saying, especially the next one, Goria. So Rashi, Phil, do you mind reading Rashi for us?
Be happy to. Rashi, then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families. Is that the same as those clans? Okay. I.e., the members of each family gathered together and wept in order to display their discontent in public. Our rabbis, however, said that the verb means people wept because of, or the word means because of family affairs. Oh, rather than according to their clans or their families, because of family affairs, because of the intermarriage of blood relatives that had been forbidden to them.
So why is that important? How does that link it at all to what we've been saying? Why would they suddenly be weeping because of the prohibition of intermarriage? So let's see what the Gur Aryeh said. I think this will pull a lot of what we've been saying together. The Gur Aryeh is a commentator who usually almost always comments on Rashi. He's what's called a super commentator. His whole purpose is to comment on another commentary. Go ahead, Gur Aryeh.
Okay, is that that intermarriage? Is that a marriage within, like intra, or is it between different
between family members? Yep.
Within, okay, the Gur Aryeh. Because of family matters, you must wonder how could they be complaining now about the relations that had already been forbidden to them, and what pertinence does the issue have here? The answer is, it is not really difficult. Now they are complaining about physical desires that the Holy One, blessed be He, is separated from them. As the verse says, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free, from the strain of mitzvot. They were not concerned about the mitzvot back in Egypt, and we were eating and drinking without this concern. And on top of all of this, they had desires for forbidden relations, and the Holy One, blessed be He, separated them from the people. Therefore, they were now stirring about among them. This is a simple explanation.
So what I think is interesting is that he's saying, we've been saying all along, that it wasn't only about the food. It was a kind of a side of them that was stirring up, that didn't like, that was having trouble with the whole idea of mitzvot, of God trying to make them into a higher, more refined people. And they, when they were in Egypt, they could do whatever they want. They had nothing, they could just live. And now God was trying to train them and giving them all these rules, and they just wanted to. And so it's a little extreme, but I think what the commentators are saying is it's their most base instincts for being riled up, right? They wanted to have these intermarriage with their own blood relatives, which, is the very basis of what the Torah does not want you to do.
Where are the mitzvot? It sounds as if they're quoting. Is there a reference to the mitzvot in the text? I'm a little lost.
There's not. It's saying Siyaf Rashi, so that's Rashi on. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. So I guess Rashi's comment, I don't remember seeing it, is that in general they were complaining from the strain of mitzvot. I think, and that is a simple meaning. They're tired. The mitzvot are hard for them. It's hard for them to keep to the mitzvot. And so they're complaining about the food, right? When people are complaining about the food, what are they really complaining about, right? What's behind their complaint? As Norma will say, right? Whenever there's something going on, right, with a person, what's really going on behind what they're saying, in therapy or whatever? What's their?
Rashi says, I pulled it out here. It's in would they if straw did not give them they didn't give them for nothing, straw in Egypt, would they have given them fish for nothing? Why then does it state that we had it for free, for naught? It means that for naught, i.e., that is exempt from mitzvot.
Yeah.
We were exempt from the mitzvot. And so that's how he does it, I guess.
Nice. Interesting. So that makes good sense. So I mean, Rashi's comment to me seems a little counterintuitive, but I think what he's trying to bring is important, which is they're really complaining about the mitzvot. They're complaining about the food, but really they're complaining about all of it.
Responsibilities.
Right? It's hard to be a Jew, right? What's the Yiddish expression? It's hard to be a Jew. So they're saying it's hard to be a Jew. You expect so much of us, God. We have to eat this food. It's always the same. We can't eat all the stuff we want to eat. It's just hard to be a Jew. Okay, we only have 4 minutes left, but we'll start to read the next section, the commentary. So next section was all of Moses, God getting very angry, and Moses's complaint. So now we're going to turn to the Or Achaim. Would someone else like to read?
Yeah, I'll read. Did I conceive this whole people?
Even before God's anger was kindled very much.
Oh, okay. The reason why the Torah describes God's anger as
Meod, yeah.
meod very much is that the people who fall victim to seduction by Satan have been victimized in a sense. The same could not be said of the people described in our paragraph who had actually provoked the evil urge within themselves. There's no category of sin which is greater than that.
So they made, it's not that they were tempted, but they riled it up themselves, within themselves.
Right. So, or chachayim, that I can.
So now we're getting into Moses's kind of chutzpahdik words to God. Did I conceive this people, or what is all this? Why do I have to carry them? We'll talk about this more next time, but this is an interesting commentary. Go ahead.
The reason that Moses made such an apparently inappropriate comparison is based on Sanhedrin 19, where we are told that whoever teaches the son of his friend Torah is considered as if he had given birth to him. This is also a comment in Tikkuni,
Zohar.
70, that all the souls of the people who marched through the desert were branches of Moses' own soul, and that he was considered a father of all those souls. Moses may have alluded to two periods in the life of a son when the father is responsible for his deeds. The first period is an obligation of a biblical nature, such as before the son reaches the age of 5 or 6 when he commences to study Torah. The second period is a rabbinic decree. According to the rabbis, the father is responsible for misdemeanors committed by his son until the son reaches the age of 13. Compare Ketuvot 49 and 68 respectively. Although at the time Moses asked this question, the Talmud had not yet added the additional years that a father is responsible for his son. It is something most people will accept readily, especially Moses, who was a prophet, in view of the fact that Abraham is reputed to have observed all the rabbinic ordinances already in his time. Although they had not yet been instituted, Moses, with his prophetic insight, certainly was aware of all these ordinances. Concerning the period during which a father is responsible for the deeds of his son by biblical injunction, Moses asked, "Did I conceive them?" Concerning the period during which a father is responsible for the deeds of his son by rabbinic ordinance, he asked, "Did I give birth to them?" The meaning of the letter, hey, in the word Chanochi, one that expresses confirmation, willingness to accept the premise implied in both God's legislation and rabbinic ordinances. Had the children of Israel been minors, Moses would gladly have shouldered the responsibility that Jewish law imposes upon him. He complained that he should not be expected to shoulder that responsibility for people who had long since become adults and responsible for their own actions. Even if the Israelites had been his own biological children, he would long since have been free of the burden of being saddled with their mistakes. He added by inference that if he would have been asked to provide something minor for the Israelites, he would gladly have provided it, providing it would be in his power to do so. However, how could he be expected to supply a whole nation with meat in the middle of the desert? By asking,
How can where am I going to get this meat?
right, by asking, how can I get, Moses also implied that the request did not even constitute something necessary for the well-being of the people. It was merely a luxury.
Okay. Along an interesting comment, a little bit of rabbinic jumping, connecting things that are, but I think that the interesting part is that he is getting to something which is, Moses is saying, basically, am I responsible for these people? Right? That's what he's saying, that I give birth to them. That's what he's saying. Am I responsible for them? And, he's quoting all this Talmud that says, well, as a parent, you're only responsible up to a certain age. And, are you responsible for the deeds they do? And he's saying, well, Moses was saying, I'm not responsible. But what I feel from reading this is, well, maybe they're biologically grown, but spiritually they're still children. So maybe spiritually Moses is still responsible for them on some level. And that's part of what's really happening here.
Yeah.
Indeed, a heavy burden.
Yeah.
A heavy burden. A lot is being asked, to provide meat for all of them and to hear their complaints. And again, this is like the second day of travel, right? He set out yesterday, and this is the second day of travel. So there's a lot of, or it's the fourth day. I think the first 3 days.
Got 40 years of this.
Yeah, so what's happening here? You get worried, right? Moses saying, he's 80 years old, right? I'm 80 years old. These people that I give birth to them. And now you want me, God, I have to take care of them. Why don't you take care of them?
I feel for Moses here. I really feel for Moses here. He really is responsible for them. They really are behaving like children. And he really is trying hard not to be the grumpy old man here, but he's in a very difficult position, right? He's of a priestly family, right? And he talks to God, I mean, face to face. So clearly he is a special person among humans, and he is shouldering this tremendous responsibility under very difficult circumstances with the most reluctant people on the planet. And he's entitled to complain. He's entitled to challenge God in this particular context. Did I birth these people? No, he didn't. But yes, he is their father on earth. He is their leader. He is responsible for them. And they will take as much of a toll on him as he is putting on them. So I think it's really interesting that the persona of Moses here, because he also has been transformed. He was transformed at the burning bush, right? And now it is his tremendous responsibility to put these people in the middle of a desert, right, where there's nothing else going on. He's got to put them through the fire. He's put them through the parting of the Red Sea. So they've been tested in that way. He's got to test them. Everybody's being tested here, right? Moses is being tested. The people are being tested. The land's being tested. I hope everybody passes.
Yeah.
I hope everybody. And if they don't enter the promised land, right?
Thank you. Well, we know how some of that story ends. Now, as you were saying it too, Moses, he has 40 years from when he lands in Midian to the burning bush. And that's his training. So he has the training, and then he has the fire, and he at least has some preparation. And the children of Israel, they went through, they haven't had those 40 years of preparation. They first had the fire. They went to Mount Sinai. They accepted the calling and now have to go through the preparation. And so he's also seeing what a long journey they have to go through.
Oh my
Maybe
gosh.
that must be depressing for him, knowing
Oh
how long.
my gosh.
And God is also depressed knowing how long they're going to have to take. So at least God is speaking. So anyway, we're going to hit pause here and continue again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.